Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cinema 130, Film Appreciation. We're now starting Unit 2. We are in Week 5, and we are covering cinematography. Very, very important part of filmmaking, and essentially the essence of filmmaking. So we have a lot to get into. So I'm going to share my screen, make sure that you're following along with the book, and we will have some great information here to share. All right. So cinematography. So this, look at the word, cinema, photography. So it's the photographing of the film. And this is the key aspect of filmmaking. And we start with a shot from 1917 in the great cinematographer, Roger Deakins. So the case study 1 is due on adaptation. This is week 5, unit 2, lecture 5. Open your book to page 20, look for page numbers in the right-hand corner. Okay, the art and technology of motion picture photography. That's what we're talking about. It involves a variety of techniques from selecting a lens, lighting the shot, choice of cameras, lenses, filters, film stock, and then also the camera angle and the movements. This all is part of cinematography. It essentially creates the image you see on the screen. A series of shots form a cohesive narrative in the movie. Cinematography composes each shot, considering every frame and how it looks to the camera. It's not enough just to simply photograph characters talking. You have to light them, position them, frame, compose, because the camera paints a picture of emotion and meaning. Here we see Roger Deakins on the set of Blade Runner 2049. So we've been talking about this person. The person in charge of this function is called the cinematographer. And here I have some examples of some of the greats over time. The cinematographer, also known as the DP, okay, the director of photography. You'll see it written different ways. They mean the same thing. They shoot the film, they operate the camera, they choose the lenses, and they create the framing and composition, along with the director, of course. They're executing the director's vision, but they contribute artistically as well. There are 2 assistants associated with the camera, the first and the second. So here's a look at how a crew works. Here's the camera. The talent is who the actor is, getting some makeup. The camera operator, or DP, is got his eye on the lens. Dolly grip is moving the dolly on the tracks. First AC is pulling focus. Director's back here waiting to watch the scene once they can shoot. Art director's looking at the set. Okay, the cinematographer, director of photography, DP. Get used to all 3 of those. It's the head of the crew. Okay. They frame the shot, they compose the shot, they do the lighting along with their crew, their specialized crew. They operate their camera. So the eye is on the lens, all right? And of course, they're going to conduct all camera movement. That's all during production. In post, after the film is theoretically complete, color correction and film processing, okay? The DP is a creative artist. He's going to contribute quite a bit. Here we see one mounted on the dolly. Notice the dollies allow for an operator to be able to be there. And he's making a lot of creative choices. And when a director and a producer select a DP, they select someone they want to work with who can give them the look that they want. So let's get into it. Here's the things we're going to talk about. Shot sizes. So what's the framing look like? Okay. Angles, how you compose a frame, camera movement, so putting the camera on a dolly and moving it around, placement of camera, lenses, devices, so we'll talk about the devices that move the camera, and of course, camera as storyteller. Okay, first off, we start with shot sizes. So they go from extreme long shot, okay, to extreme close-up and everything in between. All right, so an extreme long shot, we want to show the background. Even in a long shot. A long shot means we're seeing the whole body. We don't do this a lot in filmmaking. We don't need to see the legs all the time. Most of the time we have a medium shot or a medium close-up. And then once in a while, you want to focus on some specific part of a person and you go for an extreme close-up. Last shot I want to mention is the establishing shot, which essentially shows us where we are. It's the shot that establishes location. And here it is, the establishing shot. Here, a shot of New York. Then we cut to a shot of outside the restaurant. Then boom, we're inside the restaurant. So this is from the show Seinfeld, which had the exterior shot in New York, but the film itself was made in Los Angeles. All the interiors were shot in Los Angeles. They would simply shoot exterior establishing shots to make you think it's in New York. Next, we have the master shot, a very important shot. That's usually a wide shot that covers all the action. Notice even in this master, we don't see the legs, not important, no information down there. And it establishes the room location. It features all the characters, features all scene action. And usually you'll shoot the entire scene from the master, and then you'll punch in for mediums and close-ups. The medium shot is basically from the waist or from the chest up, giving us all the information we need: the face, the shoulders, the chest, and the hands. It's the most common shot, and it's good for action, especially or someone's doing something above the waist. Two shot is basically a medium shot with two people. Pretty simple. Then we have the close up, and that's just the face, and they can frame it different ways, but essentially that's just the face, focusing on the actor, focusing on the performance, and it captures the emotion. And that's why the close up is the moneymaker. Actors want a close up. That's when they really get to take control of the frame. You can see the subtlest adjustments in their expression. And of course, there's an extreme close up where you punch in. We have an example here from Planet of the Apes and one from Citizen Kane. The long shot is where we've pulled back and we can see the whole body. Okay, once again. And we do this because we want to illustrate the background. We want to show some relationship between the actors in the background. Maybe the father and son alone on this beach overlooking San Francisco. Maybe that conveys some sort of emotion in the scene. We need to see the background, or if these two were going to fight or suddenly run or some action was going to take place, we could want to see the whole body. Now, another shot that you're going to see a lot of in Hollywood is called the over the shoulder. Okay, and it's just what it sounds like. We're shooting over the shoulder of one character, in this case Voldemort, and we're seeing Harry Potter. Here again in Titanic, over the shoulder. And what this does is we don't want to look at the profile of actors, so we want to look at them straight on. But by having the other actor there, it sort of frames them together in the shot. We get a sense of their proximity, and this is one of the most common conversation shots you'll see in Hollywood. So once again, the shot sizes going from extreme close-up out to a full shot, or also called a long shot. That's where you see the whole body, the full body. Most shots are in the medium range. Here's the shot chart again, illustrating from extreme long shot to extreme close-up and establishing shots. So another thing to think about is where you put the camera, the viewpoint. So here's a great shot from Pulp Fiction where he's placed the camera inside the trunk. In fact, when the shot opens, the camera's closed, it's dark, it opens up, we see the guys, they have the guns. It's just a cool, fresh angle to kind of heighten the film a little bit. Where you place the camera makes a big difference. I mean, there's lots of ways to shoot the shot. You just don't necessarily focus on the actors. In both of these examples, we see great placement of camera. So that leads us to camera angles and what they mean. So you can put the camera in a variety of different places, as you see here, and each one conveys something different to the audience. So here's a breakdown of the angles. We've got basically the most common one is called straight on or eye level. Okay, and that's the easiest way. And when you're taking a photo of somebody with your cell phone, that's probably what you're doing. You're shooting from eye level, but sometimes you're going to want to slightly raise the angle. It might improve the way the person looks, or it might change the focus of the shot, or you're going to want to go low angle and shoot them from below. Let's look at the examples. Eye level, high angle, low angle. Then you have bird's eye and worm's eye, and the tilted angle. Let's get into it. So the most common, of course, is eye level. And this is where the camera is just right across from the actor at an eye level. This one from Alice in Wonderland. We have the low angle shot where the camera is below the subject. We're looking up. It changes the dominance. Now all of a sudden the actor is above. This is also a POV shot, okay, from the perspective of the baby, but it creates some dominance. This was used very effectively in Citizen Kane by Orson Welles. He wanted the camera so low at sometimes they actually had to remove the floorboards on the soundstage. The extreme version of the low angle is the worm's eye view. You don't see this one a lot, but it obviously conveys like an insect's perspective. Then you have the high angle. Now it's reversed, and now you're the camera, and you're looking down at the subject, which creates a different dominance. Okay. So another example here, extreme high angle from The Incredibles. We're seeing the shadow of this giant monster they have to fight. And the extreme angle just conveys this a lot better than an eye level shot, okay? And of course, we have the bird's eye view. Just the opposite, seen from way above, like a bird would. There's also something called a tilted angle, can be called the Dutch tilt. And this is, if you look in the background, you'll notice that the walls are tilting. That's because they've taken the camera and they've tilted it. Not something you usually see. Usually you're leveling the camera. But this is an insane asylum from 12 Monkeys, and Bruce Willis is going through some insanity. So the way this camera effect sort of heightens the themes and the narrative and what's happening in the story. Okay, so just to recap, most shots are shot at eye level. I mean, it's the most common, but you also have high and low angles to show dominance, whether the subject is dominant or the camera is. The tilted angle, of course, is used to show chaos, psychosis. Often they'll use a tilted angle in a fight, anything where the action's kind of dramatic or psychotic. Next, we move on to framing. Okay, and so every frame of painting, the cinematographer is trying to make the most interesting shot they can and convey the themes and the tones of the story. So it has to look good, convey the information, and also contain some narrative elements to it, be adding to the story. So in cinematography, framing is the presentation of visual elements in the frame, especially the placements of subject in relation to other objects. Framing can make an image more aesthetically pleasing and keep the viewer's focus on the framed objects, okay? We always want to make sure we're looking at what the director wants us to see. So look at this example here. Here's the whole scene, but for this shot, we decided to zoom in, or not even zoom in, just choose a different lens and frame it here. Well, why? Because all the information we need is contained right here. He's talking on the phone. We want to see he's out in public. Maybe that's relevant. But we don't need to see all these things. Now, maybe he's going to go and sit down in this chair and we'll widen the lens, widen the frame rather. But we're framing to capture the information that's relevant to the shot. Here we are again, just to recap, going, depending on what we want to convey, this looks like a bully. We might want to do a close-up to show how angry he is. We also might want to zoom out here to a more mid shot to be able to see his clenched fists. It depends on what we need to see. Do we need to see the body or just the face? So when framing, there's some very basic rules I want to introduce, and this slide kind of shows them all off. First of all, one you should remember from lesson 1, the rule of thirds. In filmmaking, we almost always frame things on the thirds. Once in a while, things are centered. Wes Anderson and also Kubrick tend to do that. But most of the time, things are framed on the thirds, as we see here with this grid. Also notice there's something called leading space. She's looking off to the right, so guess what? We put more space on the right, sort of leading her eye off camera to whoever she's taking a photo of. Also, look at the background. You have to think about the background. So we call this clear space. So there's nothing in the background that's distracting from her. Sure, it's a little brighter than her, but she's in focus. This is all out of focus and it's kind of washed out. So we don't really pay attention to it. So that's keeping the space clear. And then lastly, headroom. Number one mistake that intro photographers and students make on Zoom, they put their head in the middle of the frame. You want the top of your head near the top of the frame. Just pay attention to all of our shots and you'll see you don't want too much headroom. So here's lead room. The actor is here looking off to the left. So we want to give this more room. It sort of implies the space between her and another person. When we frame it this way, kind of awkward. It doesn't mean you can't do this. Maybe you want to have someone come in through the door to surprise her. Maybe that's interesting, but generally you want to give leading space. And then clear space. Here are the examples, which is a more interesting shot. These girls in the background are fine, but they take away from the subject of what we're really trying to capture. And the same thing here, the lightness of the skin contrasting with the darkness of the background, the darkness of the hair contrasting with the lightness of the background. Here's headroom. This is what you don't want to do, but you'll see it a lot on Zoom. You don't even really need this much. You can have your head near the top of the frame so that your eyes are on the third line. This is how we photograph and film and television, so on and so forth. This is just how it's done. These rules are standard. Lastly, a little more complex, we have something called matching. And so the idea is that you want the subject that they're looking at, in this case, the baby, to appear in the same place in the frame from shot to shot. So if I'm looking at the baby, then when we change to the other shot, my eyes are still here on the baby. They might switch to the mother here, but you're keeping the subject here on the right side of the frame, here on the right side of the frame, here on the right side of the frame. Even when the shot changes and the way he's looking changes, you're keeping the audience attention in the same place. And here's an illustration of that. And this will relate to the 180-degree rule we'll talk about in a moment. So you have one actor here on the left side of the frame. Here's George Clooney. When we switch to the other over the shoulder shot again, he's in the same place. Notice he's in focus. The shoulder guy is out of focus. Shoulder guy is out of focus. Subject is in focus. Okay. Camera movement and equipment. So as I've tried to illustrate with just a still photo, sometimes we want to move the camera. We want the camera to illustrate what's going on and kind of put the audience in the seat of, or put the audience in the seat of the character. That's another thing that cinematography does. So if there's a fight, maybe we shake the camera. If there's a thrilling scene, maybe we move the camera fast. We're trying to convey the emotions of the audience, and we can do that with just more than dialogue and story. We can do it with camera. So this slide, which I believe is replicated in your book, and by the way, make sure you're following along in the book as we go. So these are the various camera moves that are possible. So we can dolly in and dolly out. So we're moving the camera towards the subject or moving it away from the subject. We can boom or jib. Sometimes this is also called a pedestal shot, going up and down. We can truck from side to side. Okay, we can move the camera from side to side. That's sometimes called a truck or a tracking shot. And then we've got the pan. Now the camera is mounted and it just pivots from the spot that it's mounted. Here it just tilts down, and of course a roll. You don't see too many rolls, but you'll see quite a bit of all these other shots. Let's take a look. So the pan shot is real basic. So the camera is following the motorcycle. It's moving through the scene. The background is blurring. We call this a pan shot. Okay, the camera just moves from left to right. Doesn't get closer to the subject, just pivots from left to right or pivots up and down for the tilt shot. Here's some more shots, dolly left and right. So, in the dolly shot, we're moving the camera from further away to closer in, or from closer in to further away. In the truck shot, we're just moving from left to right. And in the boom or the pedestal shot, we're just moving the camera from one position to another position higher. Okay, depending on what we're photographing. We'll look at some examples. So here's the tracking or the trucking shot. The camera tracks parallel to the subject. So she's obviously walking across the frame, running away from home, and the camera is going to follow her. Same thing going the opposite direction. He's going to run to jump on the train. The camera's going to follow the action. Makes for a much more interesting shot than just a still or static shot. Here's how it's set up. Very much often there's a really nice smooth track that's laid down and it's leveled. You can see that they've taken the time to make sure it's level. They can't have the dolly going over uneven ground. It's going to create a bad looking shot. So this is the dolly being mounted on tracks and filming the action that's happening over here. Same thing can be done with a car on a subject that's going to move faster than a person can walk. With a tracking shot, you can also track into the frame. In other words, you can follow someone from behind, watching over their shoulder as they enter into the scene. And so here's what we see is the dolly on tracks for a push-in shot. This is very common. The dolly grip pushes the dolly along the tracks. That's the DP mounted to the dolly eye on the eyepiece. So here's a great example. Let's just watch this. This is a really good little film which illustrates what we're talking about. Oh, start it over again. We'll watch it 2 times. So notice how the frame ends. All of a sudden, the danger is revealed. Here, the crane is just panning all over the scene, giving us just basic information about what's going on. Here, the camera is going to pan down on a crane, or just crane down, excuse me, and find the subject finally. Okay, so these are all examples of crane shots, putting the camera high in the air and coming down and finding the subject, but doing it in a purposeful way. So now we're going to talk about the things that the camera mounts to. So we have the tripod, the dolly, the crane, which we just saw an example of, the Steadicam, and then of course it can mount to your hands. You can go handheld. We'll look at that. Here's the tripod, pretty basic. The camera remains pretty stationary on the tripod, but you can do pans, tilts, and rolls. Okay, so that's the movement that's available to you when using tripod. Usually when you use a tripod, called in the business the sticks, you're doing a static shot, but you can also do a pan or a couple of these other options, but usually the tripod is for static shots. Here's the dolly. You do a lot of motion shots on here. Camera mounts up here. The whole dolly can extend up. It can roll forward, backward, any direction. It's all controlled from back here with these levers. And so you also have places to sit for the DP and the AC, okay? It also secures the camera. It holds it in a steady place so it can't get knocked over, very important. Here's a crane shot. Now, in this case, the DP is not up here with the crane. He's back here operating and looking at a monitor. But this allows you to put the camera high up and swoop down or run along the ground. You can do all kinds of great shots with a crane shot. Lastly, we have the Steadicam. Now, this is a newer development. It was invented in 1976, and it mounts to the operator almost like a harness, and it has hydraulics in it, which keep the camera from jumping. So what it allows the operator to do is run, go up steps. Basically, anywhere a person can move through space, the camera can go. Cameras have gotten smaller now, so you can do all kinds of shots that were never possible. And this was introduced, first used in a major film was in Rocky, and it was Sylvester Stallone running up the stairs. It was invented by Garrett Brown, which made him famous. And it makes a lot of shots possible that before were not possible to get. So now we're going to take a look at a Steadicam tracking shot. This is from Goodfellas. This is a fantastic film and a fantastic example of cinematography. This is also called a ONER, which means it's one shot, one take. Okay, no edits. This is all done from one roll of the camera. Let's watch. Here we go. Okay, as they walk through the shot, we see them entering the scene, and this is on a Steadicam. Okay, so the Steadicam operator is following them. They're going to go down the steps here. Okay. Oops. And they're taking the time. This is a long shot. They're walking, showing us how much effort that it takes for him to get into this place. Now, this is one of the first dates that these guys have had. So he's trying to impress her. All this information is telling us that he comes here a lot, that he knows everybody, that he's got special treatment. And now they're pushing it into the absurd. I mean, she's laughing. It's like, wow, talk about getting special treatment. You're walking in through the kitchen. They allow you to do that. Now let's see where this shot ends. Little cameo there. And notice the music in the background. It's kind of frivolous and romantic. It's from a bygone era, which matches this time. And now, okay, notice he's tipping everybody as he goes, illustrating that he has money. Okay, now the camera follows the table, and it's going right up in front, right in front of the band. So in this one shot, they've told you all this information about who Henry Hill is. Okay. All right, he's getting special treatment. And that's the point of a long shot like that. That's why they took all that time. That took hours to set up, and they probably had to do several takes. Here now we're looking at some other examples of mounts just to sort of show you. We don't have to get into all these, but shooting when a car is running and you actually need to see the background as real. They have a lot of different things they can do. They can suction to the door. They can mount here on the front. There's a lot of elaborate car rigs that are also used to get those shots. We don't have time to go into all of them. Lastly, we have handheld. This is when the DP shoots the camera handheld. You know, when you want a frenetic, intense look, okay, maybe it's a fight, maybe it's a character running away. This is a desired sort of look. Sometimes you do it because you need to get a quick shot, or you just want that feel of handheld. It's sort of a more immediate. It can also make the shot look amateurish if you desire. Here's a review of some of the mechanisms. We've talked about some of these. You don't need to know all these, but there's just a whole variety of ways that you can put the camera in motion or give it a different angle, including a drone, which is becoming increasingly popular. So now we'll move on to camera. We won't talk a lot about camera because it's just an intro course, but essentially you had the old film cameras with the magazines. Now you have the smaller, lighter, more efficient digital movie cameras. Here we see Nolan with a IMAX camera shooting 70mm, but we see a lot of digital cameras are now the standard. It's just much easier to work with. We're going to talk about lenses. There's a whole variety of lenses that can be used. So let's focus just first on three: the standard, the wide, and the long. Okay, and then we'll move into zooms, fisheyes, filters. So a standard lens is a 50mm lens, and it's called a standard lens because it's used for many of shots, and it most closely replicates the human eye. Okay, so it looks the most like the way a human would see a scene. On the other extreme, I'm going to talk about the extremes now. We have the wide angle lens. Okay, so that means it's got a very wide angle that's shooting. And what you get with that is you get a lot of deep focus. That means everything in the shot will be focused. You get a very wide shot, and less light is needed due to the width and the angle of the camera. So wide angle shots are used quite a bit. And let's contrast that now with a long lens. It gets its name from the way it looks. It's also called a telephoto lens. We use this when we want to bring a subject that's far away much closer. Okay, allows the camera to be far away. It also has a narrow depth of field, okay, which means that only some parts of the subject will be in focus. We'll talk about that in a moment. So here's a wide angle lens shot, okay, giving us this really wide perspective. If you want to show nature in all its glory, wide angle is a good choice. Here we see it in a film. This is from The Martian, and we see Matt Damon on the surface of Mars, surrounded by the environment. We want to show to the audience how barren and dangerous and how alone he is. So now we move on to a long lens. So long lenses, for example, shooting a bird in flight. Obviously, you can't be very close. You're shooting from the ground up at the bird. Notice how only the face of the bird is in focus, but even the wings start to fall off. Now we're shooting a subject which is very close to us, but notice how her hair and certainly the background fall out of focus. That's because the long lens has a narrow depth of field. Okay. Long lenses also tend to compress space. They tend to like mash everything together. This has to do with the optics of the lens. So here we see an example where the characters are, probably half a mile from this plane, but the lens sort of compresses it. So we have a wide angle lens versus a telephoto lens. If we want to show the environment, assuming we're keeping the camera in the same place, so the camera's not moving from where it is. If we mount a wide lens, this is what we get. If we mount an extremely long lens, then we're going in for a tighter shot. Okay. But remember, we can always move the camera closer. Okay. So when it comes to choosing a lens, a DP will choose from any like a dozen lenses they'll have on set, from wide to long. I showed you the two extremes plus the one in the middle, the standard lens. Each one will look a little different, and the DP will choose the best one for the shot. So a film might be shot with a dozen different lenses, changing lenses for almost every shot. Lastly, I want to focus on the zoom lens, which has an adjustable focus length, which what that means is within the shot while the camera's rolling, you can go from wide to zoom or wide to long. You can go from having a very wide shot to closing in and getting closer on the subject. So the best way to illustrate this is with an example. So let's go back to the master, Stanley Kubrick. Here's some examples of some zooms. Okay, we start on the subject. And now we're going to start to zoom out. and reveal the background and the other characters. Now we're zooming in. We're zooming into the subject, getting more intense. Okay, showing the background to start, but then getting closer. Here we're zooming out, starting with the subject and zooming out to reveal the background. Okay, so those are just a few short examples of how a zoom can work. And it's a very effective thing. It was invented roughly in the 60s. Also, real quickly, you can put lenses on the camera to change the way the image is captured. You might use a UV filter or even a colored filter or some sort of sparkler filter to sort of change the way light reflects. And we won't go in too much detail on that, but cameras can be mounted with lenses. So now we're still talking about lenses and lens choice. So let's look at two extreme examples. So we're shooting the subject from roughly the same distance, okay? But notice how the focal length and the depth of field change. So here's a wide angle lens, okay? Notice that almost everything's in focus, but look how different his face is compared from shooting the same actor. That's right, this is the same person with the same glasses on. Shooting them with a zoom lens changes the way they look. So this is amazing. Let's look at all the various examples. So we're going from wide all the way to a long lens. And each time his face shape begins to change. So a DP has to consider this. What's going to make this actor look the best way in this shot for the scene? This is why lens choice really matters. You'll notice with long lenses, out of focus. The background's out of focus. We can't really see the background here, but trust me, it would be in focus with a wide lens. Here's the same principle applied to a scenery. Here we see the wide angle lens showing the whole farm, but not a lot of detail, not a lot of information. Maybe we want to go to a 300 millimeter lens, essentially a long lens, a telephoto lens where we can capture more detail happening at the farmhouse. So this really brings us to a discussion of distance to subject. Remember, you can use any lens you want. You just have to change the distance that you are to the subject, whether you need a long or a wide angle lens. So here we're very close to the ball. Depends on what lens we want to choose. Probably we're doing a wide angle lens because it looks to me like most of this stuff is also in focus as well as the ball. So when we want to use a different lens but we want to keep our framing, we just move the camera closer. So a wider angle lens, like a 35 millimeter lens, we can be pretty close because it's wide. But if we want to be able to see the whole character with a 200 millimeter lens, well, then we're going to have to move further away. Okay. Once again, long lens, shot looks pretty much the same, but notice background out of focus. With a wide angle lens, everything's in focus. Same thing with three different examples: long lens, background out of focus; middle lens, like basically a standard lens, the most obvious one, mixture of soft focus; wide angle lens, everything's in focus. So the DP is going to decide what he wants. Do I need this information about the background, or can that just fall off out of focus? Here we see a long lens, and they're effectively using the depth of field. So the depth of field is narrow. So basically this lock is in focus and all the others fall out of focus, and we're at some maybe European capital. We don't need all the details here. The important part of the scene is this lock. Maybe there's something special about that. Here's an illustration of just what we saw. So if we want this second palm tree to be in focus, we know that the depth of field is only 2 feet on this lens, and so we put that palm tree within that 2 feet. Everything else is going to fall slightly out of focus. So comparing the lenses once more. So in this example, we have a long lens shooting the subject. The focal point is there, so that means just this part is going to be in focus, which means this tree and these tree and the mountain will be out of focus. We switch to a wide angle lens, everything's in focus because we have a large depth of field. Okay, talked a lot about camera placement. Where we put the camera, very important. These are all some great shots from a variety of films that used this principle. So first off, remember, we're in a single camera shoot, which means if we want 5 different shots, then with a single camera shoot, we're gonna set up and move the camera 5 different times. We don't set up 5 cameras, we use one camera and move it 5 times, creating 5 just different and distinct shots of this conversation. Okay, now this leads us to a discussion of the 180-degree rule, which basically is a rule that states once you have two characters, you draw a line between them and the camera cannot cross that line. You can put the camera there, you can put the camera there, you can put the camera there, but you don't put it on the other side. All right. And here's a reason for this. Shooting from behind the lines keeps the subject in the same position from shot to shot. In other words, as long as we stay, here's the imaginary line, you don't actually draw it on the floor, but as long as the camera stays on this side of the line, essentially 180 degrees, instead of doing the full 360, then the camera position will remain the same. So here we are illustrating the principle. From this camera angle, we shoot the girls from the side. Then we switch to an over the shoulder of the shot. But notice the girl that's in the right remains in the right. And when we switch over here, she's still in the right. That keeps the actors in the same position, which is much less confusing to the audience. They don't see the actors jumping around. Okay, moving on to camera as storyteller. What can we do with the camera to tell the story, to make it more interesting? So we can do that with a lot of special shots, of course. And the list of them here: soft focus, POV, the insert shot, the push-pull shot from Vertigo, the ONER, and the whip pan. So, you can, sometimes it's desirable to soften the focus. 90% of the time we want our shots perfectly focused, okay? But once in a while, for a romantic scene, you'll use soft focus. Point of view, this is when the shot is taken from the perspective of a character, okay? So we know that that arm extends to the head and of the character who she's holding arms with. It's also one of the few times actors look at the camera. So here we have a POV shot of the protagonist in Kill Bill, and she's looking up at her former friends who have now killed her, and they can look at the camera because it represents the character's POV, point of view. There's also something called a reaction shot. That's when we see some action go down and then we cut to another character reacting to what just happened. In this case, this is from Jurassic Park, probably a dinosaur. Then we have something called the insert shot, and that shows a detail likely to be missed by a wider shot. Okay, so if we really want the audience to know how much time this character has, then we might do an insert shot like this, showing a detail of them holding their watch, just to make sure the audience caught that. All right. So an insert shot covers action already covered in the master shot, but emphasizes a different aspect of that action due to different framing. It maybe gives us some details for the audience to pay attention to. Okay. And we already talked about the ONER. That was our example from Goodfellas. That was a long take done with the STEADICAM, tracking the subjects into the building. So we won't watch that one. So camera as storyteller. Let's go further. What other things can we do? Remember, the DP is more than just capturing the action, just photographing it. They're trying to photograph it beautifully, and they're also trying to enhance the story, enhance the mood, convey information with the camera. Okay, so we have something called a whip pan, and that's when we have one subject here, and then we whip the pan around as fast as we can to look at a different subject from a different angle. And I tried to illustrate it here with a still shot. That's called a whip pan. You're going to see a lot of those in Grand Budapest Hotel. That's a favorite technique of Wes Anderson. Next, we have something called a rack focus. That's where the focus shifts from one subject to another subject. So this subject's out of focus, then all of a sudden we pull focus in the shot and this guy becomes in focus. Great for dialogue scenes when characters reveal something. And here we have a GIF illustrating this example from James Bond. He obviously wants to have that drink. So we focus on the drink, then we switch to James Bond. Isn't that interesting? That's a rack focus. Very effective little technical shot. Now we're going to look at one more example from Jaws, because the only way to show this is through motion. This is called the push-pull shot. It's a dolly in. So you got the dolly on tracks and you're dollying in towards the subject. Simultaneously, you're zooming out. And it creates this really unique effect that we'll watch here. I'll cut down the scene just a little bit. And it's also sometimes called the vertigo shot. So remember, this is Jaws, and this character, this is the sheriff. He's really worried about this next attack by the shark. So he's nervous. He's waiting. All these people are coming up to him and harassing him. Sorry, I keep slowing down the shot, but we're just going to zoom in a little bit here. Okay, some close-up shots of kids playing. Now the dog's missing. Kind of a little foreshadowing in the scene. Oh, there's the bone, but there's no dog. And now we go to the shark's POV. This is the POV shot. As we'll learn, the mechanical shark they built was so lousy that he cut a lot of the scenes of the shark swimming underwater, and they went with this POV shot. So it's a POV of the shark. Here he comes. Okay, now look for the push-pull shot. Here it comes. People stand up and cut to push-pull. Here it is. Wow, the push-pull shot, very effective shot. The camera dollied in while it also zoomed out, and it creates that very unique optical effect where the background kind of seems to move. And it's really conveying the state of mind of the sheriff as he's seeing yet another person die on his watch. So I just want to mention too that we have fog. I mentioned this before, often gets added into anywhere, any kind of location. This is artificial, and it has this incredible effect. It creates all these God rays. It's very effective for showing up background and lighting, and it creates a mysterious effect. Also can be used for period pieces to sort of connote a older, softer time. Very effective thing to do. Exposure, another major consideration of the cinematographer. We'll get into that next week with lighting. Okay. And then there's also aspect ratio, and this is going to be decided well in advance of the film, and that's you're deciding how big do you want the frame to be. And there's various different sizes. Old Hollywood used to be almost a square at 1:1. Over time, Hollywood's gotten wider and wider. We learned that in our first lesson. And most films today are shot on 16:9, where they're really, widescreen is the standard now. And the reason I bring this up is in Grand Budapest Hotel, you're going to see the film change aspect ratios depending on the time period of the film. So whatever's popular in that time, that's the aspect ratio that you see them using. So it's a little bit of nerd note there for that film. Okay, so we're at the end of our lecture, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the review. So we talked about the cinematographer, definitely going to be a question on your quiz about that, also known as the DP, has a couple of camera assistants. We talked about shot sizes from establishing shots, the big ones, to masters, mediums, close-ups. Talked about a long shot and over the shoulder shot. Angles, we talked about angles from high to low, and what that means for dominance and how the characters are perceived. Tilted angle, okay, that's where the camera is kind of cockeyed, bird's eye to worm's eye. Framing, we mentioned the rule of thirds, we covered that before. Leading space, clear space, headroom, and then matching from shot to shot, so the audience's attention remains in the same place. Then we talked a little bit about lenses, depth of field, talked about a long lens, which has a narrow depth of field versus a wide lens, which has a wide depth of field, okay? And what we're talking about here is the focal length. We also covered the distance to subject. We talked a little bit about filters, foggers, exposure, and viewpoint. Further going on, we had the tilt, the dolly, and the boom, or sometimes called a pedestal shot. I'll accept any answer there. Pan, truck or track shot, and handheld. These are all different ways we can move the camera. We talked about the tripod, the crane, the dolly, the STEADICAM. Of course, there's also handheld. Lenses, we went from wide to long. We also know that as a telephoto. We also had the zoom lens. We also mentioned the standard lens, but there's really dozens of lenses. Those are just the highlights. Camera placement, we talked about the 180-degree rule. Could definitely see a question about that. We looked at some examples of the ONER, the push-pull shot, the reaction shot, whip pans, inserts, POVs, and soft focus. So that's it for today. I'm going to come out here and stop the share. So I hope you enjoyed that. A lot of information. Please reach out with any questions. Hope you were following along with the book. The book matches the lecture, so you should be able to pick up on the terms and get more detail as you need. Work on your homework and reach out with any questions. Hope you're enjoying this examination of cinematography.